If you have multiple sclerosis or any other neuromuscular or autoimmune disease that affects your walking, and you've been wondering how to appropriately and efficiently use trekking poles to help with your walking, look no further. We're going to review everything you need to know about trekking poles right now. I'm Dr. Gretchen, physical therapist and multiple sclerosis certified specialist. I specialize in helping people with MS and other autoimmune and neuromuscular conditions improve their walking and make your day-to-day activities feel easier and less cumbersome, which usually means better strength, better mobility, and better walking. And there's lots of exercises you can do to help with that. If you're curious about any of those exercises, the best place is my online MS wellness program, The Missing Link. I'll put information down in the description where you can learn a bit more about it. But another thing that you can do is use mobility aids, one or multiple, depending on the day that you're having. Today, we're focusing on trekking poles. When you purchase trekking poles, usually they come like this in a bag, so really short. If I were to put these on the ground, this is how tall they are. So the first step is getting them taller to be the appropriate height for you. Now, there's usually two different heights that you have to choose from, and it really is going to depend on which way you want to use them. So I'll share both with you. Try them both out, see what feels best for you, and then pick the one that feels best. Every pair of trekking poles will be a little bit different, but for the most part, there's going to be some way that you can loosen a clasp or a clip down at the bottom. And when you loosen it, you can then open it so that it comes to a taller position. So there's usually some measurements on the stick of some kind. And if you go up too high, there's usually somewhere where it says stop. So obviously you don't want to go up that high. So you mark it wherever you want and then close that clasp. And then if you need it even taller, that's when you can pull the lower one down and then clasp that. Now I just chose a random height. This is going to be too tall for me. But you'll see now it's tall. It's not short and down to the ground. So the first step is to make it taller, but then we need to adjust it. There's two main heights that you can choose between. Option number one is going to be to start at a 90-degree angle of your elbow. I'll turn this way to show you. So you're about 90 degrees, and then you come up about one fist height. So it would be about here. I'll show you that again without holding onto the pole. So you're starting at this 90 degrees and then put one fist on top, and that's about the height that you would want the handle of the trekking pole to be. So let's see if I happen to guess this correctly. I don't think I did, but 90 degrees and then a little bit up. So right now, that would be me holding here. I do need to lower this a bit. So I'm just going to take that clasp off, lower it to the appropriate, looks like that would be correct, appropriate height, and then close that clasp. Step number two, once you have that height, is make sure the other trekking pole matches that same height. The easiest way to do this is to go back to the numbers and just make sure they match. So this one says 125 and we're just above that. So I'm going to find that same measurement on this one. Okay, so these are now the same height, which is perfect. So this is the version where you're at 90 degrees and then you come a fist distance up, and this would be the height. Now, once you are at the correct height, now you want to make sure you're using the handles correctly. The best way to use the handles to allow you to use these safely and effectively is to come up from the bottom. So the handle is usually hanging down. You're going to put your hand up through the bottom and then hold on to the trekking pole handle that way. And what this does is, first of all, if you happen to let go, maybe you have hand weakness, you happen to let go, your wrist still stays onto the trekking pole. The trekking pole won't fall over. But also, it allows your wrist some assistance down below so that if you do need to put a little more weight through the handle, you can actually use your wrist to help you versus only depending on your arm strength. So same thing on the other side as well. You're going to come up from the bottom and then grasp onto the handle. And I like to hold on to the handle and, shouldn't have worn a black shirt today, a handle and the strap. So it would look like that. I'm going to skip ahead to show you how to walk with these at this height, and then we'll come back around to show you the second way that you can use trekking poles. The way to use trekking poles so that you don't break your natural stride is to move one forward at the same time as one leg. Generally speaking, the way this should work is you move one arm forward at the same time as your opposite leg. So my right arm is coming forward at the same time as my left leg. And then we switch. So left arm, right leg. And you keep alternating. So this is the way that you would walk if you're hoping to not break your stride, where one is coming forward at the same time as the other leg. Some people don't feel safe walking that way. So another option is you can move just one trekking pole and then the opposite leg, then the other trekking pole, and the opposite leg. This will slow you down a bit, but it is another way that you can walk safely with trekking poles. So with this type of walking, your trekking poles for the most part are staying in front of you. They don't come behind you too much. They really come in line with your body when you're moving forward before you bring it forward. But you won't see them behind you. That will happen more with the second version of how you can hold your handles and use the trekking poles. So let's dive right into the second way that you can hold your trekking poles, and that is down near your hip bone. So instead of holding the pole up here, it's going to be much lower, and you'll walk a little bit differently with it too. So what you want to do is find your hip bone. You might have to bang around a little. Don't bruise yourself, do this lightly, but poke around until you can feel that hip bone. That is what you are aiming for. You want the handle to line up with that hip bone. The way that I like to do this is to unclasp whatever's making your trekking pole tight so that it should move now. Then come to a position where you lower it down to where your hip bone is, lift it up, and close that clasp. Now it should be at the appropriate height without you having to, constantly make different changes. So usually pretty quick and easy. Of course, we want to do the same thing for the other trekking pole. Once you do that, you should have two trekking poles that are the same height around the height of your hip bones. Now, same thing as before, we want to make sure that we are using the handles. So you're going to put your hand up from the bottom and then over the strap and hold on to the handle. Same thing on this side, hold here. And now adjust, make sure that they are at your hip bone height. Now, the way that you typically use trekking poles at this height would be behind you, almost like you're pushing off of the trekking pole. You, of course, could use it in the same way as we initially discussed, where it's coming forward at the same time as the opposite leg. But with this other way, what you're going to do is still move your arm forward at the same time as your opposite leg, but you're using this trekking pole really to help propel yourself forward. So then you bring your other leg forward and your opposite hand, and you're pushing off your trekking pole. So if you're doing this at a normal speed, it might look something like this. So you'll see my arm and my trekking pole is behind me. That wasn't happening when we were walking with them in the first way. So again, opposite arm, opposite leg, but really push off of it to help you propel forward. Generally speaking, people will use this technique if they're walking faster because it allows you to do so at a quicker pace because you're not keeping them up in front of you. Try both of those techniques. There is not one that is correct or wrong or better than the other. It's really a personal preference. I prefer the initial way where they're a little bit taller, up at the 90 degrees plus a fist, and we're using them in front. But regardless, one thing that is very important to know is that you should not be putting a lot of weight through the trekking poles. Trekking poles are just meant to add a little bit of assistance and support when you're feeling unsteady. Simply by using 2 poles or even 1 pole, it extends your base of support. So instead of just having 2 feet on the ground, we now have 2 poles that are much wider. So it almost would be as if we're standing this wide apart. And the wider our stance is, or the wider our base of support, the more balanced we feel. But any mobility aid, including trekking poles, are not meant to withstand a ton of your body weight. Your goal should be to put as little body weight as possible through your trekking poles. I actually have a podcast episode and YouTube video all about how to use mobility aids and specifically how to transition from using one to a different one. For example, how to go from using a rollator to trekking poles. I'll put the link for that video up top. If you're interested, check it out. The last thing I want you to know about trekking poles is that more often than not, they will either come with no base on or this base, but there's actually lots of options, and I have a few of them right here. So this is the one that will either be on when you receive your trekking poles, or if I take this off, and these are just rubber. You'll see this is what it looks like without, and it's metal and pointy. And this is actually, you can see it better like this, a really great option if there is snow or ice or something that you could risk slipping on. I really like this option, having no base on it. For that, I live in Buffalo, New York. We get tons of snow and ice in the winter, and usually I recommend all of my local patients use this version in the wintertime. One thing to keep in mind is this is very narrow, very small, meaning the base of support and the level of stability is going to be less because it is so small compared to something like this, which is wider. The wider the base, the more support you'll have and will be able to put through it. So this is going to be great if you have anything slippery or, something like snow. Otherwise, I like to use this. This is rubber. It's great for indoors. So this is my other go-to, but I did just want to show you some of the other options that it comes with. Almost every version of trekking poles comes with these different options, and feel free to try them all out. This one has some nice treads on the bottom. So if you are on uneven surfaces or something that might be a little bit slippery, but you don't want the metal, then you could try this one. These two tend to be really great for mud. This one in particular is good for mud or sand, just to keep things down. This one can work for that as well, but it's also great for snow because it keeps the snow down. So the way that these go on would be you would take this one off and you slide this up and then twist it on until it locks in place. So it would look like that. Lastly, everyone is different, and as I mentioned, there's no right or wrong. If you're someone who has already been using trekking poles, whether it's a single one or both of them, and you've been using it differently than what I just suggested, if you feel safe and steady and sturdy in the version and way that you're using it, keep doing that. But if you have never used trekking poles before and you want to try, start with these two options as a starting point and see which one feels best for you. The most important thing is that you feel safe and steady and sturdy. So if for some reason you don't feel that with either of these components, try something else that might work for you. Even better if you can work with an in-person physical therapist who can try a ton of different options with you and guide you to what might be safest. As I mentioned in the beginning, of course, strengthening exercises and balance exercises are going to be helpful in improving your strength and your walking. Mobility aids are also a really helpful tool. If you are looking for MS-specific exercises that can help with getting your legs stronger, your core stronger, your walking better, check out my online MS wellness program, The Missing Link. I'll put a link down in the description where you can learn all about it. That's all for now. Have a great day.